Christ is being modeled in this Hebrew text. They are trying to show you a connection to an Old Testament person, the priesthood of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek was one of these that had been a very wonderful high priest who had led his people well before they had kings, when they had priest-type kings. One that is a king of righteousness, a king of peace. When I think about the bulletin message on the front of the page, that Christ suffered and learned obedience. As I thought about this week, I kept on wondering, why do we have to suffer? Why is that important? And it is important. Why do I need to suffer? Because before I suffered, I thought I knew. There was a time in my very young years that I thought I knew better than these couples that were getting together willy-nilly and getting married and then getting divorced. And I shook my finger and shook my head and said, oh my, shame on you. You shouldn't get married until you know. I got married. I didn't know.
All right.
I didn't know what it took. And then I got a divorce. I ran into trouble. I realized that I didn't know all that I should know. Now, believe me, I don't counsel couples who want to get married that they need to get a divorce first. But I do counsel them that I know what it's like. And I don't recommend divorce.
Amen.
Because divorce is painful. And it hurts so many people for a long time. The greatest suffering I have had has been as a result of that divorce. For years. It goes on for years sometimes. But also the greatest knowledge I have gained about life and people and how we work and how we get together and how we commit to one another and covenant with each other has come through that same suffering. And that suffering has made me more obedient. And I know that I could probably ask each one of you in a private time what you have suffered. And I could ask you if you learned anything with that suffering, or if it was just for naught, if it was pointless. But I bet you that if I had that time with you, that you would be able to convey to me some lesson that you learned. Now, sometimes people get that all mixed up and confused, and they then start to say, well, then God makes me suffer so that I can learn a lesson. And that's not what I understand about God. What I understand about God is that God gives me the tools that I need to make it through the sufferings that are going to happen because of the choices that I make in life sometimes. Sometimes I've made some really, really great choices. Like when I chose Elizabeth. Sometimes I've made some really, really poor choices. And some days I think that's when I chose Elizabeth. But not always. No, but there are choices that we make, and sometimes they're really great choices, and sometimes they're really poor choices. But no matter what your choices have been and what sufferings have come from them, my only hope is that you understand that God didn't cause that suffering what God did was come alongside you and is always there ready to show you the way, which is found here. It's found here in a whole bunch of people, which we've read throughout the 100 days that we, or the 100 stories that we read of the Bible. We read about people who made great choices, and we read about people who made some very poor choices. But we read about people that God had chosen. And He set them aside, and He used them anyway. A little bit later this week, I happened to see an email come across my email from the Disciple of Christ Historical Society. And it happened to be about our notorious church members that we have had throughout the ages. And some were really, really great leaders, and some were bank robbers, and some were people that really made some poor choices. Some were addicts. But God has called each one of us to do the best we can with what we have.
Amen.
I pray I know you're watching the same stuff I'm watching. I know you're seeing the same news come across your screen.
Amen.
You know the trouble that the world can be in. You know that there are individuals out there that have nothing but hate that they want to put out.
Amen.
And we need to be able to not isolate ourselves from it. We need to hear that, hear the suffering that is out there, and not be dismayed. We need to realize that suffering is a part of life existence.
Amen.
Good choices and poor choices are a part of our life existence. The difference is how we interact and work with and through that suffering that's going to come. Okay? Because we're going to hear, Gail, about granddaughters that make poor choices. That's going to happen. And it's not going to end with just that one time. Yeah.
They can go down the street nowadays in the best of neighborhoods, and they give it to them free.
I know,
to get
because
them hooked on it.
gets them hooked. And there were some great high schoolers and junior hires that I saw on my way to church yesterday for the service. And there's some really great high school and junior high kids that were out there, and they were holding signs up that said, "Stop heroin.
Yes.
Stop the abuse. It's killing our friends." Amen? We need to hear the news of suffering and not take the response of dismay.
Amen.
We need to hear that news of suffering that's out there, and we need to become activated from it. Moved to understand our response to it. What is a Christian response to the suffering that is out there? Because it's not going to go away. And drugs aren't brand new on the scene. They've been around for a long time. Julie.
Antonio has a question.
Oh, yeah. Antonio has a question. I need to...
He was asking us, but I said, well, ask Pastor Bill.
What's that? What's an addict? Oh, an addict is someone who's has a dependency on a drug or or alcohol or some kind of chemical or things like that. So they can't see. They've got it's almost a sickness within their system that what's been referred to as an allergy, I think, at times, have an allergy to a certain drug that it just makes them want it more and more and more, and they can't stop wanting it. And so they need help getting away from it. And so that's what an addict is. Thank you for the question. That's good. Good question. But I do know, and this sounds like a simple answer, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's not simple. It's really hard to do. But God is the answer.
It's 2 granddaughters I lost.
No, I
On
know.
heroin.
It's tough. It's tough. But God is the answer.
Amen.
If you can commit your life to a devotion to God and to that relationship and to the community of God, it can help you understand ways to work your life and make it through the suffering. Because a lot of times what gets us into doing some of those things is ignorance. And sometimes the other things that pushes us into it is a poor choice of how to react to suffering in our life.
Amen.
Okay? Because the addictions that are out there are usually a way of distancing yourself or trying to make yourself numb to the problems that are in your life, rather than dealing honestly with them and working through them. And drugs are not the only problem that we have out there, guys. There's people that are eating to do this very same thing. There are people who are doing working to get rid of them. There are all sorts of things that you can get addicted to try to cover over those problems in your life. When the best answer is to deal with it straight up, honestly, with God, because we're not hiding anything from God. God does know what you're doing. That's the promise of God, is that when we start dealing honestly with God, God's going to put everything in the light. We're not going to have to think like we're living in the dark, or that we can do some things in the shadow that God doesn't know about. And that's the promise. You can live true, you can live free, and you can live peacefully.
Not too long ago, they had a write-up in the paper about Afghanistan, where
Yeah.
boys are fighting.
Sure.
The whole families of Afghanistan people, even little kids,
Yeah.
were already hooked on that.
There's an industry.
Because
Sure.
they make it over there.
Sure.
They grow
Sure
flowers
is.
for it.
Sure is. They're not the only place that grows it either.
I know it.
So, there is a problem, but it's not a new problem. It's something we've dealt with way back in World War I. World War I, the addictions were to morphine. World War II, there was another thing that came back. And it's, again, the same root problem.
Probably like
Trying to run away,
some of the
trying to
boys
hide,
fighting over there, too,
trying to
hooked on
cover up the problems that the world brings you. And the world's problems are not going to go away. But there is a healthy way to address them. And they are found in the Scriptures and in the Bible. And Jesus knew that. Jesus was just as perplexed as any other human. He had just as many concerns and worries and the same failings as any human. But he also had a commitment to God in covenant. And God showed him the way. He sat at the Garden of Gethsemane, and he sat at the rock, and he prayed, and he bled, and he cried, "Take this cup from me." That's a human response. But at the end of that prayer, he ended in obedience. Not my will. I'm going to give myself to you. And this trajectory of my life has been leading me to the cross. And I'm not going to turn from it. Amen. Let us turn.